Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. This morning we got the notification that the Cleveland Cavaliers have decided to fire their head coach, JB Bickerstaff. Now, ultimately, I don't think that this is a massive surprise. The majority of NBA fans probably saw it coming, but that does not mean that it was the right decision necessarily. So Bickerstaff took over for the Cavaliers in 2020, actually as the interim coach, and then was promoted to the head coach. He finished his 5 seasons in Cleveland with a 170 and 159 total record. The Cavs were in a little bit of a rebuilding position when he did first take over. So ultimately, the overall record is solid, but it comes down to postseason success. And the pressure was absolutely amplified for the Cavaliers organization when they decided to trade for Donovan Mitchell headed into the 2022 season, where they gave up a lot in that deal to try and make this happen. Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, who of course went on to be the most improved player and I believe was an All-NBA selection as well last year. He may have been snubbed from that, but Ochai Agbaji, unprotected first-round picks in 2025, 2027, and 2029, as well as pick swaps in 2026 and 28. So they now no longer have control over their first-round picks until 2030. And like I said, that absolutely ramps up the pressure on an organization to have postseason success, and that is where the Cavaliers came up short, where last year they were knocked out of the first round by a lower-seeded New York Knicks team, and this year they lost in 5 to the Celtics in the second round. Now, albeit that is without Jarrett Allen for the second half of the Magic series and without Donovan and the entirety of the Celtics series, of course, and then losing Donovan Mitchell after Game 3. So I think that a lot was sort of being asked of JB Bickerstaff to overcome the injuries in this postseason, and I just think in his position in general, where the fit of the roster, it's something that I've been talking about for the past year headed into this past season. I don't see it with them. There is a glaring problem with sort of redundancy between Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Specifically, we've seen the growth of Darius Garland be a little bit stunted, having to play more off-ball. Donovan Mitchell is, technically you would call him a shooting guard, but he is very hands-on as well. Doesn't play off the ball quite as well, and I think that that's fine, but is something that I would maybe see. I think it would be really beneficial for Mitchell if he could learn to be a little better off ball, but that's sort of nitpicking because we already know he's an incredible player. He probably would have been All-NBA if it weren't for the injuries that occurred during the regular season. He wasn't eligible for an All-NBA selection. But as for the construction of this roster, like I mentioned, the backcourt, the front court as well, with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, neither one of them really able to space out the floor, caused a lot of sort of disjointed offense. They were tremendous defensively, but again, offense just was not good enough. And I think that ultimately, headed into the 2022-23 season when they first put this squad together, I fully understand playing that out. In the offseason, I would have preferred to see them make a move, and if not then, at the trade deadline, again, I don't know exactly what the move would have been. I've talked about in the past, I think there are plenty of teams that could benefit from having a Jarrett Allen, and I don't anticipate them having all 4 of those players that I named headed into next season, but I think that at the trade deadline, they probably may have made a move if it weren't for the fact that they were in the midst of a 16-1 stretch over the final month. It was the beginning of January to February 8th when the trade deadline occurred. They were on that 16-1 stretch led by Donovan Mitchell, and that was despite some of the injuries, which I do think is a little bit indicative of the fact that the fit with that team isn't necessarily there. But they were at the 2 seed at the time. They end up being the 4 seed this year. So, a pretty successful regular season, I would say, despite not exactly looking tremendous. And then they go on to win a playoff series, the first time the Cavs have won a playoff series without LeBron James since 1993, for whatever that's worth. But again, I wasn't surprised that JB Bickerstaff was fired. The Cavaliers definitely need to shake things up and make improvements, but I don't know if this was necessarily the direction to go with them. And like I mentioned, I don't think this is the final move they are going to make here. But at the same time, I do definitely have concerns for them, especially with the lack of sort of known quantities of head coaches that are available as things currently stand. Shams Charania of The Athletic put out a report earlier today that the top two names for them are Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego. Adrian Wojnarowski also threw out the name Atkinson, so maybe that works. Atkinson has a connection with a couple players on the Cavaliers in Jarrett Allen and Karis LeVert, but we saw the Bucks try and make a big-time move last year by firing Mike Budenholzer, who my feelings on him are pretty well documented. Definitely not my favorite coach in the world, but is absolutely capable. And I don't know. I mean, JB Bickerstaff, Cavaliers fans would know sort of more of the intricacies than I would. I thought that last year against the Knicks, that was a really bad showing. So I'm not necessarily fully defending Bickerstaff in terms of this is 100% a mistake for them. And maybe it just was time. Again, 5 years is a pretty long sample size to have with an organization. Sounds like maybe there wasn't a great relationship between Donovan Mitchell and JB Bickerstaff, but I don't know if I would be fully catering to Mitchell until he fully, comes out and says that he's going to have a commitment to this organization for the future. But let me know what your thoughts were in the comment section. Again, it wasn't necessarily an easy decision either way, and I'm not surprised, and this could end up being the right move for them. That's why having these injuries that sort of lead to your dismissal of the postseason, and I think the Cavaliers would have lost to the Celtics anyways, but it does sort of, at that point, what was Bickerstaff supposed to do when Donovan Mitchell and Jarrett Allen, and then you go into the final game as well and you lose your best piece off the bench in Karis LeVert? I just don't know what else would have really been expected for them, and Cavaliers are going to have moves to be made going forward. We already talked at length about some of the different rumors that have come out, Garland potentially asking out. And again, I think that they're going to have to choose probably 2 out of those 4 players, one of the guards, one of the centers, to try and build around long term. And doing so without any of their first-round picks for the remainder of the decade. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We're going to be moving on to some NFL talk, though, when we come out of the break. Justin Fields made some comments about his expectations for the upcoming season, and spoiler alert, it is not to be sitting on the bench all year long. So we are going to be diving into that when we come back in just a brief moment here. Stick with us. We'll be right back.